Have you ever noticed how some thoughts in your head don't actually feel like they belong to you? Like you're making a decision, but it's strangely crowded in there. Your parents' voices are chiming in, society is clearing its throat. That one tweet you read 3 years ago is somehow still shouting opinions. And somewhere underneath all that noise, there's you, quiet, waiting. So let me ask you something honestly. When you choose what you believe, what you want, or how you live, is it really your choice? Or is it a carefully stitched quilt of expectations, fears, trends, and borrowed ideas that just feels like yours because you've worn it for so long? We like to think of ourselves as independent thinkers. Most of us would say, yeah, I think for myself. But psychology has a slightly more uncomfortable answer. Because mental independence isn't about being rebellious, loud, or different for the sake of it. It's something much quieter, much rarer, and much harder than we realize. Mental independence is what happens when your brain stops outsourcing its authority. Think about how early this outsourcing begins. As kids, we need it. Our brains are unfinished, like half-built houses with wires sticking out of the walls. We rely on parents, teachers, culture, religion, and rules to tell us what's safe, what's dangerous, what's right, and what's wrong. That's not weakness, that's survival. A child who questioned everything would never make it past the first busy road. But here's the catch. For many people, that outsourcing never really ends. The body grows up, the mind sort of stays in a rented apartment. You can see it in small, everyday moments. You hesitate before enjoying something because you're wondering if it's cringe. You feel a flash of guilt for resting, even when you're exhausted. And because productivity culture is tapping you on the shoulder, you doubt your own emotional reaction and think, am I overreacting, or is this actually wrong? Notice that question. You're not checking in with yourself. You're checking against an invisible jury. Psychologists call this external locus of evaluation. It means your sense of correctness, worth, or truth lives outside of you. Other people's reactions become the measuring stick. Approval becomes oxygen. Disapproval feels like suffocation. Mentally independent people aren't immune to influence. That's a myth. Humans are social animals. Our brains are literally wired to care what others think. There's a reason social rejection lights up the same neural pathways as physical pain. In early human history, being excluded from the group meant death. Your brain still remembers that, even if the group is now an Instagram comment section. The difference is that mentally independent people notice the influence instead of being run by it. They experience the pull, the pressure, the subtle shaping, and then they pause. That pause is everything. In that pause, they ask a dangerous question. Do I actually agree with this? Not, is this popular? Not, will this make me liked? Just, is this true for me? That sounds simple, but your brain doesn't love that question. Because independence comes with a cost. When you stop borrowing beliefs, you also lose the comfort of certainty. You lose the safety of the crowd. You might even lose relationships that were built on shared scripts instead of shared understanding. That's why mental independence often shows up later in life, after disappointment, after burnout, after following all the rules and still feeling empty. Sometimes it begins with a tiny crack. You do what you were supposed to do, the career, the relationship, the lifestyle, and one day, in a very undramatic moment, you think, why doesn't this feel like mine? Nothing is technically wrong, but something is deeply off. That feeling is cognitive dissonance. Your inner values and your outer life aren't aligned, and your brain hates that mismatch. It creates anxiety, numbness, irritability, or a vague sense of being lost. Many people try to silence that discomfort by doubling down, working harder, trying to be more grateful, convincing themselves they're the problem. Mentally independent people do the opposite. They listen, then they don't immediately act. They don't blow up their lives overnight, but they get curious. They start tracing their beliefs backward. Why do I think this? Who taught me this? What would I believe if no one was watching? That last question is especially revealing, because when no one is watching, social masks slip. You see what genuinely matters to you, what excites you without applause, what feels right even if it never gets validated. Neuroscience backs this up. As we mature, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-regulation, critical thinking, and long-term planning, becomes more refined. But it only gets used if we actually practice thinking independently. Otherwise, it defaults to shortcuts, authority bias, groupthink, social proof. If many people believe this, it must be right. Your brain loves shortcuts. Independence requires effort, energy, willingness to sit with uncertainty. This is why mentally independent people often look calm from the outside, but internally they've wrestled with chaos. They've questioned beliefs that once gave them identity. They've sat alone with thoughts that didn't fit neatly into any tribe. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Mental independence doesn't make you colder. It often makes you more compassionate. When you stop outsourcing your beliefs, you also stop assuming everyone else is wrong for thinking differently. You realize how much of human behavior is shaped by conditioning, fear, and survival strategies. You see that most people aren't stupid or malicious, they're just running old mental software. That perspective softens you. It also makes you harder to manipulate. Advertising, propaganda, and social media algorithms thrive on emotional reflexes: outrage, fear, envy, belonging. If something instantly hijacks your nervous system, it bypasses critical thinking. Mentally independent people aren't immune to these triggers, but they notice when their emotions are being pulled like strings. They ask, "Why do I suddenly feel this way?" instead of immediately reacting. That gap between stimulus and response is freedom. But independence doesn't mean isolation. That's another misunderstanding. You can be deeply connected to others and still think for yourself. In fact, the healthiest relationships are built between mentally independent people. No one is responsible for completing the other's identity. No one needs the other to validate their reality. There's a quiet confidence in that. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to convince everyone. You don't even need to fully understand yourself all the time. You're allowed to evolve. And yes, mental independence can feel lonely at first. When you stop automatically agreeing, laughing at things you don't find funny, or chasing what doesn't resonate, the room can feel emptier. But over time, something interesting happens. The right people find you. The conversations get deeper. The connections get real. You're no longer performing a version of yourself that was designed for acceptance. You're inhabiting yourself. If you're wondering whether you're mentally independent, the question isn't, "Do I think differently from others?" It's subtler than that. It's, "Can I sit with my own thoughts without immediately needing reassurance? Can I change my mind without feeling like I've failed? Can I tolerate being misunderstood without collapsing?" Mental independence is not a destination, it's a practice. A daily negotiation between your biology, your history, and your awareness. Some days you'll catch yourself slipping back into old patterns, seeking approval, avoiding discomfort, letting other people's certainty drown out your own curiosity. That's human. The goal isn't perfection, it's noticing. Because every time you notice, you reclaim a little authority over your inner world. And that might be the most underrated form of freedom there is. So maybe tonight, when the world quiets down a bit, you ask yourself a gentle question, not an accusatory one, just an honest one. What do I actually think about this? And then you listen, not to the loudest voice, not to the most familiar one, but to the one that feels calm, grounded, and a little bit brave. If that voice felt familiar, you might already be more mentally independent than you realized. And if this made you reflect, let me know in the comments. I genuinely love to hear what came up for you. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden patterns behind the way we think and live, you know what to do. Stay curious,